Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming to our event today. We have done 5 of these in the past, and this is our largest by far, so thank you for being here. My name is Rami Martin Galiatovich. I am the Administrative Program Director of the Center for Positive Leadership. We have an excellent program lined up today with 4 speakers and opening remarks by Dr. Gill, who's our Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from University of Louisville. I'm going to do a couple housekeeping items before I talk to you about the center. Number 1, most importantly, did everybody find the restrooms? They are, if you go out the door to the right and then left down the hall, and the women's bathroom is first on the left. Secondly, you received a folder when you walked in today. And in that folder on the right side are our leadership tools that our 4 speakers are going to demonstrate. On the left-hand side is tools that are already in our suite of tools that we offer free at the Center for Positive Leadership. And those are our tools that are focused on inclusivity and justice. I would like to tell you that those tools can also be found on our website. One quick note about that is we're getting a new website in about 4 weeks, so our current website is a little bit under construction or doesn't look the greatest, but do go there if you want to explore our other tools, and we will let you know through an announcement when we get a new website. Part of the new website is us being a university center. We were called the Project on Positive Leadership from 2018 up until this April, and then we were designated a university center. So we're very excited about that. And you will be hearing from us more about rebranding and the website. Speaking of the website, we have obviously Ron Harrison here today. He's our videographer. We have Susan Harrison. She was somewhere around here. There she is. She's our photographer, and she will be taking pictures. We would like to use these pictures on our new website and in social media. If anybody is uncomfortable with that, please just come up and talk to me and let me know that you're uncomfortable with having your image used in our promotional materials. And last but not least, I'm going to bring up Karen Newton. Oh, actually, wait, Karen, I'm not bringing you up yet. Hang on. Sorry. I've been out of work for 2 weeks on leave, so I'm back, and I'm trying to get back in the swing of things. I'm going to show you a video about the Center for Positive Leadership. I was going to get up today and talk about it, but yesterday our marketing and communications department released this new video. It's a promotional video for our new website, so I thought this will be much more polished than me speaking about the center. And it's actually Ryan, who's our academic director, sitting over there next to Lee Gill in the corner, and he's also one of our speakers today. So let me cue that up for us really quick.
The mission of the Center for Positive Leadership is to increase positive leadership in the world. We do this in a number of ways, including organizing world changer groups, supporting research, developing leadership tools, helping to develop educational programs, and hosting events and a number of other things. In doing all of these things, a person might ask, why do you do this, and what is positive leadership?
We define positive leadership as an act of exceptional virtuousness that other people follow. Virtues are standards of moral excellence such as courage, compassion, honesty, humility, curiosity, generosity, and so on.
And what we mean by virtuousness is that somebody exhibits all of the virtues that are relevant to a particular situation.
Whatever virtues a person exhibits, however, must be done so in an exceptional way. Positive leadership, according to our definition, requires exceptional virtuousness. A person can exhibit exceptional virtuousness and not lead, however. Other people can choose whether to follow. If they do not follow, then the act is still exceptionally virtuous, but it is not leadership. Therefore, for those who wish to lead, they need to ask themselves how to exhibit exceptional virtuousness and how to do so in a way that others will understand what they are doing and feel inspired by it. This is why we want to increase positive leadership in the world.
We make our lives better, other people's lives better, and we make our world better.
All right, I'm going to introduce Karen Newton. Karen is an affiliated professional of the Center for Positive Leadership. She is our expert in flexibility and also mindfulness and meditation. She's going to do a quick exercise with us to get us, what's the word? Settled in. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So you may have noticed that it is indeed possible to have your brain and body not in the same place. Wow, some of your brains may still be on the Watterson, wherever, or already into this afternoon. So what we do with a practice that we call settling in is very intentionally create just a little tiny space between what we've done and what we're supposed to be doing now. And this is indeed, part of the whole realm of mindfulness, this attempt to be present where I really am. So you actually have this tool in the toolkit, and there's 2 versions of settling in at your access. So I'll give you a very short version. And for those of you who have done settling in with me before, intentional redundancy is part of the deal, right? I mean, the only way we acquire a new virtue, a new skill, is we do it a lot, whether we need it at that moment or not. Intentional redundancy is how we settle in. And eventually our minds and bodies become more skillful. It's being, this is where I am. This is where I am. I can pay attention. So the invitation is simply to begin to pay attention. And for some of you, that may be that you want to be intentional about your physical position. So find your way to a comfortable position, whatever that is for you. And for some of you, you may actually want to put your feet on the floor, a little more grounding with the gravity that holds your feet to the floor. It's a nice sensation to be aware of. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes, or you can just stare at some neutral part, something around you that has no words on it. Just stare at that. Bring your awareness to those physical sensations, your seat on the seat, your feet on the floor. Be aware of your own hands, whatever sensations are available for you to notice. Now shift your awareness bigger to the sounds in this room. And then noticing how you can bring your awareness, again with intention, back to your own physical sensation of yourself. Now invite awareness of your own breath. It really doesn't matter where, just wherever you can most easily notice that you're breathing in and out. It could be sensation in your nose, your chest, your diaphragm. It doesn't matter, just noticing that you have breath moving in and out of you. Thoughts come and go, that's just what your mind does. Settling in does not require that you stop thinking. But we do notice that the thoughts are no, never mind right now. And we're going to bring this to a close. So if you've had your eyes closed, open them up. You might even look around the room, appreciate all the beautiful other human beings who are in this room with you this morning. And now you'll shift your awareness to whatever's happening next.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, it is my great pleasure to introduce Lee Gill, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Louisville. I'm going to read a quick biography, if you don't mind, Lee, before you come up. With more than 20 years of experience in the diversity field, Mr. Lee Gill is a nationally recognized leader with both university and private practice experience, and currently serves, as I just said, our Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Prior to joining the U of L team, he served as Clemson University's Chief Diversity Officer and Special Assistant to the President. While at Clemson, he is credited with building a sustainable infrastructure to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts into the campus culture, and with creating programs that support and address the challenges facing women, Black and Hispanic students, and the LGBTQ community. He created the Clemson University Men of Color National Summit, which brings together more than 2,000 students, educators, business professionals, government officials, and community leaders from around the country. Gill also served for 8 years as Associate Vice President for Inclusion and Equity and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Akron. And before joining Akron was the Chief Executive Officer of Stratus Group Consultants, a firm providing diversity audits, training, and organizational assessments. Gill holds a Juris Doctorate in Law from the Chicago Kent School College of Law and Illinois Institute of Technology, and Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of Michigan.
Good morning. Let's try it again. Wake me up. Good morning. It is indeed a pleasure to join all of you this morning to talk about positive leadership. As Ramey mentioned, I was sitting in my office one morning around this time, and I happened to look at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And I saw that there was a job posting at a place called the University of Louisville. Right here. And I was very happy at Clemson. We had accomplished a lot of things. We had built a strong staff of inclusive, excellent warriors. We had developed strategies to focus on the politics of South Carolina. For some of you who may not be aware, the politics of South Carolina, in some ways, is very similar to the politics of Kentucky. In South Carolina, we have a Tim Scott. Yeah, okay. And a Lindsey Graham. You all know who you have here in Kentucky. The big dog themselves, let me put it that way. But when I read the posting, what excited me was what your president at that time was saying, that the University of Louisville would be a premier institution for anti-racism. Wow. A PWI, y'all all know what that is, making a statement that they were going to be a premier institution for anti-racism, DEI. So I said, let me throw my hat in the ring, because I want to be a part of that. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I was invited to come and meet with search committee members, and had a great interview, I thought. I left and went back to Clemson, South Carolina, and a week went by and I didn't hear anything. Another week went by and I didn't hear anything. And another week went by and I didn't hear anything. And not that I got the big head or anything like that, but I've been doing this a little while and I'm kind of good at it. And so I'm thinking, what's going on? So another week goes by and I happen to pick up the Chronicle again. And here in the Chronicle, Neely has gone to Penn State as president, which I applaud. And then she took Michael Smith, her chief of staff, with her. So then I understood exactly what had happened. So me believing that there probably would be a failed search, I thought to myself, I still may not hear anything. Then a week or so later, I got a call from Lori Gonzalez, who at that time, many of you know, was the interim president. And we started a conversation. Offer was made. Some negotiations, believe me, took place in terms of what was needed here on this campus, the infrastructure that needed to be built out on this campus, the staff that was going to be needed to really drive home a reality of what a anti-racist institution looks like. And that conversation went very well. And May of last year, May 15th, I started here at the University of Louisville. And let me tell you this, and I mean this in all sincerity. This is an outstanding institution with some great faculty, and I'm not blowing smoke here, with a great faculty, an intense, devoted staff, and students who are waiting for us as administrators to drive change within this university. This is an exciting time, and I am pleased to be part of this family. Now, as you all know, we have a new president, Dr. Schatzel, who came from Towson University with a focus on student success, which is what all of our focus should be. How do we ensure, because we often tout that 40% of our students are Pell eligible. You've all heard that, right? We tout that 37% of our students are first generation. I love those numbers, but we need to flip that script. We need to graduate all 40% of those first generation students, those Pell eligible students. We need to graduate them. We need to graduate those first gen students here at our university. So the president's focus on student success is one I think we all can agree with. Can I get an amen on that? It ain't church this morning, but y'all looking at me like I'm crazy. Am I talking something y'all with me here? Okay? If we graduate those students and make sure that they're successful moving out into the world, this diversity world, this multicultural world, then all of us as faculty and staff and community leaders, we have done our job. Now, let me just talk about a few things that we put in place since we've been here. Part of the infrastructure that I had discussed in my negotiations was that there needed to be certain staff members. So we've hired a director of grants and innovation that does nothing but write grants for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many of you have probably already encountered James Orley, an outstanding grant writer, and quite frankly is actually moving here next week from Pittsburgh to join our family, totally being a part of the university. We also hired a director of planning and assessment, someone who can collect the data, who can develop the metrics. Because at the end of the day, if you don't measure it, it didn't happen. Y'all with me this morning? If you don't measure it, it didn't happen. That's second. Third, we just recently hired a director of projects and communications. That individual will be responsible, and already is responsible, having hit the ground, developing projects and initiatives all throughout the university, helping us connect the HSC campus as well as the Belknap campus to break down the silos of these two campuses and to ensure that we're all collaboratively working together to drive change. We revamped positions within our office. Ms. Diane Whitlock, come on, hold up your hand. Ms. Diane Whitlock is our Assistant Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. Part of her role and responsibilities is to help break down those silos, bring HSC Belknap campus together, as well as all of the colleges Because within the colleges, we have associate and assistant deans with DEI in their titles. Good morning, Cherie. Several of them have DEI within their titles. How do we ensure that they're able to do their job? Because they can't do it alone. They need support, both human resource support, but also financial support. That's also part of the role that we're playing now on our campus. It's important that we understand that we're at an apex situation in this country. Any minute now, today or tomorrow, the Supreme Court may make its ruling regarding affirmative action. I think the majority of us realize the decision they're going to make. Let's be realistic. I think all of us realize the decision that the Supreme Court is going to make. And that decision is going to be to do away with affirmative action. Now, this has been happening for a very long time. Ever since back in the 70s when Ward Conley, the regent at the University of California, started his drive toward doing away with affirmative action and was able to be successful, and then took his drive to do what he did in California and took it to Texas. And once again, he was successful. But then all of a sudden he made a decision, I'm going to come to Michigan. I'm proud of my alma mater, y'all. Bollinger v. Gertz, Bollinger v. Grutter, where the University of Michigan said there's a compelling interest to have diversity in the classroom. There's a compelling interest to have diversity on our campuses, and took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. And of course, Sandra Day O'Connor, then on the court, wrote the opinion that said, well, hopefully 25 years from now, we will no longer have this discussion because everything will be more equal. Well, of course, we know 25 years ago has gone and passed, and we're still right where we started in so many ways. But let me ask you this question. Are we going to let the politicians change the trajectory and opportunities that students from underrepresented places have? Are we going to allow politicians to make decisions that people have been fighting for years? Come on, y'all. Come on. We stand on shoulders of people who have given their lives, not talk, but have given their lives for us to even be sitting in this room today. Huh? People who have come before us, who have strategized, who have pushed the envelope to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion became a reality. So while we may have challenges today, I have hope. Come on. How many of y'all got hope? Come on. What we have to understand, and I believe we do, because there's some awful smart people in this room. I'm looking at them. What we have to understand is we don't stop, we just become more strategic. We don't stop, we just keep pushing the envelope. We don't stop. If you can't go a straight line, I can go up the hill, through the trees, swim the deepest ocean. Whatever I have to do, we're not going to let them take away opportunities that God has given all of us. And that is our humanity. So the power of positive leadership is needed today like never before. Our professors who are going to be coming before you this morning with strategies and toolkits. I love that term as I was reading the information. With toolkits that are going to allow us and give us new emphasis, new strategies, new ways of doing things. But at the end of the day, it is up to all of us to realize that the commitment is still strong. The journey may be long, but we can get there if we work together. The University of Louisville has collaborators all across this campus, and I'm proud and pleased to be one of those to work with all of you this morning. Thank you. Welcome to Positive Leadership.
Thank you, Lee. Whew, that made me emotional, I think, a little bit. Okay, next up on our agenda is Dr. Brigitte Burpo. I'm going to introduce her briefly. She's going to present her leadership tool today, which is called a Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement Logic Model. Dr. Burpo is a native of Birmingham, Alabama, and the University of Louisville. Since 2019, she's been faculty here. She currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Education and Human Development, as well as a clinical assistant professor in the Sports Administration program. In her current role, she has implemented a climate accountability reporting system, Champions for Diversity Employee Recognition Program in the Social Justice Library and Resource Center for members of the CEHD department to cultivate a healthy working and learning environment. Prior to joining U of L, Brigitte worked in marketing of consumer packaged goods for companies such as RJ Reynolds, didn't know that about you, yeah, Tobacco Company, Coca-Cola Refreshments, and General Mills. Brigitte's corporate background and love for sports informs her research and practice, which has influenced her passion for organizational culture and how it plays an integral role in the development of leadership and innovation. Welcome, Brigitte.
Thank you, Ramey. I appreciate that warm introduction. And thank you, Lee Gill, for your introduction as well, and for all of the things that you talked about. I'm really glad that you said what you said, because what Lee Gill talked about was strategy. He didn't just come in and hope that people just treat each other well. He put in a plan, and he strategized with that plan, and he put in resources and also emphasized to leadership that there are resources needed in order to make a plan effective and also successful. So that's what we'll talk about today. A little bit more about me again. As Ramey said, I am the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Education and Human Development, and I'm also a clinical assistant professor in sport administration. My research area is actually strategic management of resources within organizations, and I study strategic management of organizations as well. And it's always funny when I tell people that, they're like, oh, you don't do DEI? And I think that that's funny. Because people don't see diversity, equity, and inclusion as strategic management, even though DEI touches every part of every organization. So if you are for-profit, it affects not only the employees you have in your organization, but it also affects your stakeholders, your suppliers. It affects your consumers, your potential consumers. If you are nonprofit, it still affects your organization, your employees, the stakeholders, and the lives that you are hoping to work with and change. It affects education from a conceptual framework, or from a conceptual level of understanding what diversity is and what it looks like and what it is not. It is also affecting how we view each other in society. So DEI touches everything in society, but from an organizational standpoint, it is embedded in everything that we do, or it should be embedded in everything that we do. So something that I want to use as an analogy, and it's because when we think about DEI, oftentimes when people talk about DEI, they talk about it from a perspective of just a remedy for everything. So if we throw a party, this will make everyone feel included. If we make a statement, this will make everyone feel valued and included. And it oftentimes does not take on the same level of strategy that we put into our marketing plans. We don't put in the same strategy that we put into our human resource plans, even though those things should be embedded as well. So when I go to the doctor, for whatever reason, I go in, they ask a lot of questions. So several people will ask me questions by the time I actually see the doctor. So the person at the front desk who's checking me in, they ask me, why are you here today? Once I get back to the doctor's office and I sit there for about 20 minutes first, waiting, scrolling on my phone and waiting for someone to come in. When the nurse comes in, the nurse says, why are you here today? I tell them why I'm here today, what the problem is, or what my issue may be that day, and then she takes notes, and then she leaves out of the office and says, someone will be with you shortly. By the time the doctor comes in, maybe an hour later, and I am taking jabs at the healthcare system right now, but about an hour later when the doctor comes in, the doctor says, so I see you're here for this problem, so tell me a little bit more about that. When did you start to see these symptoms, when did these symptoms present? When did you start to feel this way? How severe are these symptoms? Do you feel it at this time? Do you feel it at that time? What are some of the other things? And then they also ask me some questions that I haven't thought about. Have you tried doing X, Y, Z? And I bring this up because that is essentially what a plan for DEI would look like. What is the problem? Why are you here today? Are you here because you've had a lawsuit and now you're forced into changing things? Are you here because your employees are coming from a generation that demands change? Are you coming here because you see the value of having a diverse workforce or diverse consumers? These are the things that you're asking yourself when you are coming up with your diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. And so that is essentially what we'll be talking about with the DEI logic model. All right, so who has ever heard of theory of change? Okay, so who wants to, I'm a professor, so I am going to ask you all to participate. So what is theory of change? What is it? Without looking, let me go back. We'll have class today. What is theory of change? Anybody? We can take guesses. It's okay. It's a learning environment. Okay, Rami.
For something else, where somebody is in the stage of change, like, are they contemplating change? Are they actually making change? I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, so, okay, theory of change looks at what an issue is. So it looks at what is the problem, why is the change needed, and then how will we create that change. So it has 3 steps to it. So it's identifying a problem, identifying strategies to help create the change, or what we call interventions in change management or change theory, and then assessing outcomes or identifying the intended outcome. What do you want the overall outcome to be? So again, if we're looking at why are we here, then your why are you here should tell you what the outcome you're looking for will be. So if we are here because there was a lawsuit, somebody sued you because you were making racial epithets in the office, and so because of that, your outcome should be not making racial epithets in the office, okay? Or preventing that from further action or something of that nature. So that is what theory of change looks at. Why are you here? What do you want the intended outcome to be, and how are you going to get there? So there are different reasons or different purposes of organizational change. So there is strategic change, which means that you are going to change the structure of the business, or you're going to make some sort of structural change because it is needed in order to update maybe processes, policies, or anything like that. People-centric change. So again, if you have consumers or you have employees who are saying, we are demanding change, we need to see change now. You're seeing low retention of your employees or students, for those of us who are in education, then that is considered people-centric. Structural change, technological change, unplanned change, and remedial change. So these are different types of change that takes place in different organizations, or different purposes or reasons for change. So when we look at technological change, that is, of course, updating your system. So do we have a system that works with the type of technological needs that we have in our organization? Are we updating our website so that it's user-friendly? or so that it is accessible for people who have diverse abilities? Are we doing unplanned change where something has come up, a necessary action following an unexpected event? So are you changing things because something drastic had taken place and now you need to shift? Because Lee Gill brought up our shift in our political atmosphere, have new laws come out and now you have to make an organizational change, so an unplanned organizational change. Looking at remedial changes, so again, if the problem comes up, so a lawsuit or just a potential lawsuit or a bad incident happened, then are you coming up with a remedial change, meaning there was a drastic issue and now you have to find a remedy for that. What we are going to talk about today is a structural change and strategic change. And we're going to talk about that because those are the things that really lead to more inclusive organizations. So strategic and structural changes. And this is why we need a logic model. So who has ever heard of a logic model before? Okay, what is a logic model? I do students like this all the time because they'll repeat exactly what they see. So what is a logic model? It's a flow chart. So it looks at your inputs. What are you putting into the organization? What are you putting in terms of resources? Are you putting human resources into it? Are you putting your financial resources into it? Do you have spatial resources? So we call those physical resources. Are you putting in equipment or whatever the case may be? Informational resources. These are all things. What are you putting into this effort? And then outputs are, what do you want to get out of it? Or what are you putting into it? What activities are you doing in order to get to the outcomes that you want to get to? So when we look at this logic model, it's a visual representation of a program or process that outlines the inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes associated with achieving a particular goal. And are we able to send the presentation out after this as well?
Actually, I'm going to send it out to everybody.
Okay, good.
Today.
Okay, so when we use logic models, this is used in order to organize how we are strategically managing one or a very broad type of initiative or new change. So when looking at organizational change, we use the logic model because it helps us organize, it helps us stay focused on what we're doing. Who has ever planned a DEI initiative and then all types of things get thrown in at the same time? Okay, so what was that like?
Well, nothing got done.
Okay, nothing gets done, right? Because you're all over the place. One piece of advice I always give people who are working on DEI is to focus on one thing at a time. And the reason why I say that is because in my first year working in DEI, I was focused on everything at the same time and I was pulling hair out by the end of the year. So in order to really have effective change and to have lasting change, it is important to focus on one thing at a time. And using a logic model, this is for one thing at a time. So you can have multiple logic models operating at one time, but each logic model needs to be focused on one particular initiative or one aspect of the organization's change. So let's dive into this diversity, inclusion, and engagement model. So with this model, it looks at pre-planning and post-planning, and it takes theory of change and it pretty much combines theory of change with the use of logic models. So you use logic models in theory of change, but this is more encompassing because, as you'll see in just a moment when I pull it up, that it looks at pre-planning and then post-assessment as well, which is an important part of making sure that the plans that you're doing, you're not just a one and done. You're also looking to see whether or not the resources that you put into those initiatives were effective. Did you plan it where the resources that you thought you needed were the resources that you actually needed? And this is also to help get more commitment from organizational leaders when you go back and say, actually, you know, we had this plan, this is what we thought we would need, but we also need X, Y, Z as well. We need more space. We need more human capital to help move these forward. So, as I pick this up, what are some, start thinking about some of the things that you would like to focus on in your organizations, because we are going to practice. So everybody has one of the forms in your folder as well. But with the pre-planning process, so being mindful of, you're going to identify the problem and you're going to set a commitment. So not only are you going to say, this is what the problem is, but this is what I commit to doing in order to fix it. And that commitment is going to be what is going to guide you through the rest of the process. It's going to keep you focused on what the end goal is. You're also going to identify your inputs, the outcomes that you want, so your anticipated outcomes. This is your commitment. Why is that your commitment? What is the outcome that you want to get to? And then, how do you measure success? That's very important, because if you don't set your success parameters early, then you won't know how to determine whether or not it was successful after you finish. So you need something that says, if we have this amount of attendees, then that was a successful event. If we have this amount of, or this percentage of employees retained in this particular division next year, that is a successful initiative that we have. If we are recruiting a certain amount of students or employees from this particular college fair or job fair, then this was successful because this is the amount that we've determined is successful. And then when we do the post-assessment, you will evaluate those things. So did you remain focused on the original commitment? And that's important to assess, because sometimes we do get off track and people will throw different things into our hat or into our bag and it gets shaken up, and so then we do lose focus. So it's important to assess whether or not you remain focused. Did the efforts help solve the problem in any way? So also important to understand with DEI, we cannot fix centuries of things in one initiative. So it's important to see whether or not anything has been helped. Have you remedied anything with that initiative? Even if it is small, it is okay to consider a small success a success. Were the anticipated inputs sufficient? So did I have the resources that I needed in order to be successful? What is the evidence of intangible or tangible outcomes? So what evidence do I have to say this is what we did with this and this is how it was successful, or this is how it was effective? And then your measures for success. So assessing your measures for success. Now, some ideas for using this would be for new and very specific initiatives. Again, making sure that you're being very specific so that you can stay focused. And then updating current initiatives. So this is not something that you have to start with a new initiative. If you have something that you've already tried before, you can use the post-assessment in order to see what was effective and what was not effective in order to tailor it or improve it and try it again if you would like to. Also, large-scale changes, so reorganizing different units within the organization or different offices, hiring new people to create a new office or something of that nature, new organizational policy development, all of these larger scale things you can use it for. And then when there's a small team responsible for change. So I had a conversation with Ms. Ferguson today, and we were talking about, she asked me, she said, do you have a big office? And I told her, I was like, no, it's just me. And so the reason why it's important to have a tool like this, if you have a small office, is because, again, you are identifying, or you will be identifying, who are the stakeholders or who are your key partners that you can work with as well. So this is something that you can pull people into in order to partner with, so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming when you are a small team or a team of one. So these are some of the things that are ideal for using the logic model. So with the logic model, you can pull it out of your folders. So on the first page, there's your pre-assessment or your pre-planning tool, which is the actual DI model. So it's diversity, inclusion, and engagement, because this is also to engage your employees as well. So in that, you are identifying your key partners. So some examples of that are your full-time employees, Also, are your customers, can they be partners? Are you doing focus groups? Are they going to help you figure out what it is that you need to do? Your sponsors, how can they be pulled in to help with that as well? Any suppliers, do you have suppliers that you can partner with in order to move an initiative forward? Government officials, it's important to get the government involved, especially if you are a nonprofit or educational institution. Community leaders, partner organizations, there are many different people that you can pull in if you have committees or task force within your organization, getting them activated to participate in the planning and implementation process of your plans. Key activities, so identifying what specific activities you'll be having in order to get to your goal. And these aren't activities like a party, these aren't necessarily activities like physical activities. These are more so like what types of things are you going to be doing? So what is your recruitment going to be looking like? Who's going to be involved in that? Are you going to increase your recognition for employees so that you have a more inclusive environment that where employees feel valued? Legal policy development, all of these things, organizing employee resource groups, anything like that. What activities are you going to be doing? Identifying your key resources is important, so your financial, human, informational, spatial, all of those types of resources. Where is this going to be taking place? Who's going to be involved? What money do we have to put into it? Who can help organize this? If you have a small team, if you have a large team, who's responsible for what? Looking at your cost structure, so cost is important. What are the most important costs? So is it most important for compensation, for compensating the people who will be working on this, or paying for outside vendors, or paying for a specialist to come in, or a consultant? Where's the bulk of your cost going to be? And your die proposition, this is in the middle because this is what focuses all of those things in. It stays in the center. What commitments are you willing to make? Are you willing to make a commitment for creating a space of belonging? So are you committing to that? Are you committing to advocating for equitable practices? If so, then everything, your key partners, all of that should be focused on those equitable practices. Do you have an attorney who is involved in this process, or someone who is well-versed in legal matters related to human resources so that they can participate? And these are, of course, very specific to whatever your goal is, and going back to why we are developing this organizational change, that is where your die proposition will come from. Relationships, so what relationships will be fostered? Will it be the relationship with your employees that you're working to foster? Are you working to foster relationship with your consumers, or potential consumers or customers, or with government officials and partners? Channels are ways in which you are going to get this done. So are you going to create a task force? So once you've identified the people who can participate, are you going to create a task force, a committee? Are you going to activate your marketing teams who are not necessarily a part of the planning process, but they will need to be informed about what this new plan will be as well? Social media management, your policy implementers, who is going to be helping you carry out this plan? And then your partner segment, so who are we creating diversity, inclusion, and equity values for? The employees? Is it for customers? Is it for your community partners? Who is it for? Are you making an impact in the community or an internal impact? And then your intended outcome. So it sounds like a lot, but once you start putting this together, it helps tie everything together. So what we're going to do is we're going to try it. If you are here with someone who you work with in an organization, you're going to work with them. If not, just partner with the person who is closest to you and start discussing a potential initiative or a potential organizational change that needs to happen. And then we'll talk about this in about, I'll give you, 5 minutes. It's a very realistic timeline. I think you all can do it. All right, so what was that like? How was it? It was fast. It was fast. It wasn't long enough. Of course, that's just a taste of what it would be like planning. And what I wanted you all to see is that this is a collaborative type of thing. This is not something that you want to develop by yourself. You want to do this with a team of people, even if they are not directly working in a DEI capacity within the organization, they can still be a part of it. Because something else that also takes place is the people who work in different units have different experiences, and so they can give information or insight to what the actual needs of the organization are. What was something that was really challenging about using the model? What was challenging?
For us, I felt like we were trying to answer questions in one of the boxes, and then it got us started on filling out parts of the other boxes, so we started kind of going around, and when I was hearing you talk first, it's like, okay, we want to try to stay focused, and then, which to me implied a kind of a certain order or a certain flow, when I don't think it's as cut and dry as that assumption was.
No, it's not something that has to be very rigid in nature. The model itself is essentially to keep us focused on what the goal is, but it doesn't mean that you can hop around from box to box, because sometimes you will identify some people in a box and you'll say, and they also have resources that we can use for this. And they also, I know so-and-so works for them and they know someone else who does this. So it's okay to hop around in the boxes as long as that middle box is still the reason or the focus. What is the commitment? Are these people who we're identifying in all of these different boxes, is that still going to get us back to our intended result? Are we going to get to the outcome that we want to be in? I'm going to go ahead and jump us to the post-assessment so that you all have time for questions at the end. But the post-assessment is essentially the exact same thing, but looking at it from an after or hindsight view. What was actually needed? Who were our actual partners? Who was someone that I didn't initially think of as someone who would be a really good person to help out with this, but they ended up being a really good resource because they knew where all the bodies were. So who is someone that I didn't think of that had connections or a resource that I needed? So we wanted to put together this initiative, but we didn't even have any space for it. So what was something that I didn't consider before that I should have considered in that process? So it gives you an opportunity to, once again, try to hone in on and develop whatever it is that you are working on. And this is, again, this is an ongoing process. The thing about organizational change is that it takes years often for an organization to change. So I always like to use Reebok as an example because, or even Reebok and Champions, because those are two organizations that really do a good job of like reinventing themselves and then popping back out even stronger. So when I was growing up, Champions was $10 at Walmart. You can get anything, anything Champions branded at Walmart for about $10. And now Champions cost about $60 for a sweatshirt. And they did that because what they did was they were ongoing changing their organization. It took years. It wasn't something that happened over a short amount of time. It happened over development of years, and it was because they had an intentional plan, which is what happens with marketing. And the same thing is true for DEI. These aren't things that happen overnight, even though that's what the urgency for these changes are. But the change doesn't actually happen overnight. It takes an intentional and calculated plan, and it takes time for us to see those changes. So even if we are putting forth all of these efforts, don't expect overnight change. And again, going back to what I said before, those small victories are still victories. All right, so what questions do you all have? Are there any questions? Okay.
What advice do you have when your idea is just so big? And you said you talked about focusing on the small. I was telling my partner, I'm like, I have the big ideas. I don't know how to like find that small, you know?
Okay.
To focus on. So what's the strategy to make a big idea small?
Going back to looking at what is the purpose of the big idea? What outcome do you want from that big idea? Is the big idea you want world peace? Okay. So then thinking about, okay, I want world peace. In what areas do we, or what ways do we not have world peace? Okay, so we don't have world peace in terms of social media, clapbacks or something like that. Like whatever the case may be. People are defensive. We have poverty. We have hunger. We have unhoused. So picking one of those. And then, okay, we have unhoused. What types of resources do unhoused people need? And then that funnels you down even more. Okay, now we know that they may need addresses in order to get a position to work, or they may need certain clothing or whatever the resources may be. Are we looking at urgent resources or long-term resources? And then that funnels you even further down. So taking those big ideas and then finding out what is actually needed, or like really giving it some thought, so that it takes time to think of those things as well. That's a good question, though.
I have more of a comment, and it kind of go with one of the arrows that you have in the logic model regarding priorities. So it feels like the logic model has been really helpful, but when Gill was amazing at coming up with strategies, saying I need all these people and getting resources to make change at university level. When you're at a smaller level and you may not have the financial or human resources to make change, how does the logic model help if you still can't move it forward because you don't have the resources? So I guess the comment really is as I'm processing this aloud, is if it's a priority, you have to make it a priority. Right?
Yeah. So you still have to, if it's a priority, you still have to get things done, right? And sometimes you may not have the human resources that you need. I am, for that particular role that I'm in the college, I am an office of one, and I'm still held accountable for the work that I do. So the work doesn't stop because it's just me. But one thing that does help is having a logic model helps me stay focused, and it also helps me explain back to people that what I'm doing is strategic management. What I'm doing is not changing how people feel about each other. I'm making structural changes and strategic changes within the organization, and that takes time. I think emphasizing that back to the people who hold me accountable, having that logic model and saying, these are the things that I'm working on, these are the people who I'm able to pull in. However, they may be faculty members who also have a large teaching load. They're working on a research project, a grant project, and so they don't have the same time to devote to it that someone who's fully dedicated to DEI in my college would have. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm still accountable, but it does help me explain and give some context to the people who are wanting that urgent change. So I think that that's kind of the purpose of the logic model, is to show this is work that's being done. I'm having to pull in these people. They have limited resources as well in terms of time, but the work is still being done. It will just take longer. And I would use that as leverage to get someone who can work with you.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar comment that in addition to the planning and the assessment, I think it would be a great tool for reporting on progress.
Right.
So if you're not getting the outcome, if the outcomes aren't there,
Right.
then that means something's missing.
Right.
You make the argument.
Yeah. Okay, I got my time thing, so she's doing the Sandman, sweeping me off the stage. Thank you all for your time and for participating. I appreciate you.
So while Ron is getting Emma hooked up, I'm going to introduce Emma, our next speaker. But I also wanted to tell you a big announcement. We're going to have snacks out here in about 10 minutes. And there's going to be a big break at 10:20. But of course, feel free to get up if you need to use the restroom. But we will have a big break here shortly. So let me introduce Emma while she's getting queued up. She is going to present her active inclusivity, a skills-based model. I owe extra thanks to Emma. We had a speaker drop out at the last minute, and Emma agreed to fill in literally like 2 weeks ago, so thank you. Dr. Emma Sterrett-Hong is an associate professor and the associate dean of equity and inclusion in the Kent School of Social Work and Family Science. Yay, Kent School. I've been teaching for them for about 15 years. Her research focuses on the impact of societal structural factors and interpersonal relationships, on the health and well-being of underserved youth, as well as the dissemination of evidence-based psychological practices. Her work has been funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, Substance Abuse, and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, and the National Institutes of Health. In addition, she is a licensed psychologist and licensed marriage and family therapist and maintains a small family therapy practice. So welcome, Emma.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to first thank everyone for inviting me to be here and for being such great hosts. And thank you all for being here. I am not a morning person. You'll never catch me any place at 8 in the morning. But when I came in this room, I will say that I just felt like more energized. I felt like the vibe was so positive, and it really just gave me a lot of energy. And so, thank you all. So I'm going to be presenting something that is really new, that really before 2 or 3 weeks ago lived in my head, and then Ryan Quinn in the College of Business kind of helped me turn it into a tool. And so it's called the Active Inclusivity Development Model. And it really, I realized like a week ago that it spells out AID, which I really like, because it is about how to help organizations that are feeling stuck. And so the reason I started thinking about putting together sort of, for me, what's a conceptual model or a guide is because I was working with some organizations either through volunteer work in my role as Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion, or consulting with others, and noticing that there was a lot of real motivation, interest, passion related to DEI work, and yet these organizations were really getting stuck. And I was surprised for my own organization, others, and I think other people who are part of those systems also were surprised that how is it that we know that this is something we care about, but we are having a lot of internal resistance, we are having obstacles, and so that's what made me start thinking about, okay, what are some of these obstacles, and then how to start the process of getting unstuck. So what I started to notice is that it seemed like I could sort of organize some of the obstacles or barriers to sustaining DEI work into 6 areas. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And more so, I'm going to share with you some stories because it's not, what I will say is that this model is not super prescriptive. It's really meant to inspire you to think about, okay, where is it that we might be getting stuck, and how might we generate solutions, or at least some strategies to try. So I'm going to go through each of them one at a time. So first of all, I wanted to start with, so the Active Inclusivity Development Model organizes these obstacles into 6 areas, and they spell out the word choice. Again, I'm a therapist, not in business. That was all Ryan, so choice. So C is critical consciousness. So before I tell a story that sort of illustrates how critical consciousness can be a barrier, but then also generating more critical consciousness can be a way to sustain some of our DEI work. I first wanted to ask if you all have heard of this person, Nimrod Murphy. Has anybody ever heard of this person? Okay, have you all heard of the phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Yes. Okay, so something I really just learned is that actually, when this phrase first was developed, so today I think we typically think of it as what? If someone had to describe what is that phrase meant to say, meant to communicate, what does that mean?
Put you down, pick yourself up.
And did I hear something? Yes. Yes. So it's like pick yourself up, be independent. But ironically, originally, it was actually kind of a sarcastic insult. So this person, Nimrod Murphy, in 1834, had written, is actually in Nashville, about that he had created some sort of perpetual mobility device to keep himself in perpetual motion. So back then, there were a lot of people coming up with different inventions and trying to sell them. And so a columnist commented on this idea and said, yeah, I bet he thinks he can pull himself across, I think it was like the Cumberland River, using his bootstraps. And so this phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, was originally a sarcastic remark about, actually, you can't do that, right? And so you see this newspaper or this article at the bottom from Inside Higher Ed that says the bootstrap fallacy, self-levitation doesn't work. So one thing I wanted to say, and when I think about critical consciousness, so we talk about critical consciousness a lot. What is that? And so for me, it really means thinking about how whatever is going on is actually much larger than the individual. So it's not just, even if it was possible, which is not, but even if it was possible to pull yourself up all by yourself, by your bootstraps, that still doesn't mean that there isn't a larger pattern that could be contributing to whatever the difficulty is. So in telling some of these stories, and I'm going to tell you the first one now, I wanted to mention that probably partly because I am a therapist, I've been really sensitive about how to share things so that they're concrete and kind of illustrate some of these points without giving too much detail to make someone feel sort of exposed. And so what I'm going to do is start with a quote, and I did not put it up here because, again, I don't want anyone, not that anyone in this room even probably would know any of these situations, but just because I am overly cautious, I'm just going to read you the quote and then tell you the story. So the first quote is, "Some of our faculty of color have some of our highest student evaluation scores." Some of our faculty of color have some of our highest student evaluation scores. So my story related to this idea of critical consciousness is that one of the first things I wanted to do as Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion is try to change our system of course evaluations. And the reason I wanted to do that is because when I first arrived here, and the informal standards are different depending on the academic unit, but in our unit we had very high expectations for student evaluation scores. And so really, if you weren't at least somewhere between a 4.3 and a 4.5 on a 5-point scale, you were considered to not be a good instructor. So beyond that, and I think that a lot of people in this room are familiar with this, we know that those scores are also biased. So there's been over 100 studies showing that faculty of color tend to get lower scores on student evaluations. Women who do not conform to traditional gender stereotypes and gender attributes also tend to get lower scores. Teachers teaching certain subjects that students don't necessarily want to learn tend to get lower scores. So we know that this is just not a very, first of all, it's not what I would call a valid measure from a measurement standpoint, because it actually doesn't measure learning or teaching effectiveness. It actually measures the experiences that students are having. But second of all, we know that it's biased. So I started in partnership with our dean at the time, this idea of, okay, how about we change this to be more inclusive, to be more empowering, and to be less sort of quantitative in terms of there being like an absolute cutoff. And so we worked on this together and came up with this idea that our faculty, at the end of every year during our annual reviews, were going to write a paragraph describing how their efforts that year in terms of teaching, feedback they'd gotten from students, ways that they changed their courses, and essentially how they felt they had grown as an instructor. So this was great, wonderful, to me in my mind anyway. And then we started to get some pushback about this idea. And then at the time, in trying to work through this, a small team of us was talking about it, and one of the members of the team had said, well, maybe we should just forget this whole idea. And if you really look at our scores, our faculty of color, some of our faculty of color have the highest scores anyway. And so that's when, at that point, it ended up being helpful to think about this being more of a larger issue, that this is not just about, okay, we may have a couple faculty of color who are beating the odds, who have found a way to get very high scores, but this is about overall the idea that we know that we're using a tool that is biased. And actually, it's something that, although we're focused on some of the discrepancies in terms of scores, but actually having this more empowered approach would help everyone. And so thinking about it that way, the committee did decide to move forward, and we just finished our second year doing our annual reviews in this way and have continued to expand on it. And I will share that the first year, a couple of the people who were happiest that we had this were people from the majority group who felt like, gosh, I had a really rough semester. I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to tell a story, to tell my narrative in writing, and to talk about what I learned. Okay, so that is critical consciousness. So, and that's one way that we kind of use that to try to get unstuck in that moment. So then the next one is handling ambivalence. So the ambivalence that I have noticed, and I'd be curious to hear what your experiences are, is that I have seen that there can be a lot of passion, a lot of buy-in related to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, just in general, in a vacuum. But when that starts to be associated with some level of discomfort, some level of sacrifice, that's when it's harder to move forward some of our DEI initiatives, and where we'll see like a pause. So then this idea of ambivalence also, and how to handle it, for me comes a little bit from the idea of motivational interviewing, and some of you may have heard of this, but if you haven't, essentially motivational interviewing is this idea that with behavior change, particularly things that involve a mix, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, that we can feel ambivalent, that there can be some internal conflict. It's been used a lot for, with addictions. It can be used for other behavior change, becoming more physically active. So I put this picture here that comes from the Harvard Business Review that says, "Be a better ally." And what I appreciated about this, so I think, we can look at it as there is a person who is depicted as an ally who's helping a woman of color, it looks like climb this ladder. But one of the things I also was thinking about is for the ally, what, in terms of, what consequences do you think he is experiencing in this picture as he's helping this woman up the ladder? Yes? He's not ascending, thank you. So while he is expending some energy helping her up, and that means he's not climbing up his own ladder. Any other ideas about any consequences? Yeah, he's probably working extra hard. He's trying to stay where he is and also trying to lend a hand to support her as she's climbing up, yes. And so I think actually, as much as we often think about being an ally as a kind of, I loved Dr. Burpo kept talking about a party, but yeah, about being at a party, we're all together, standing next to each other. And I do think there is enjoyment, of course, but I also think sometimes there can be, there is some effort, there can be some discomfort in the progress. And I think to really sustain the progress, that we really need to learn how to handle that and realize it's going to come and to accept that. And so I'll share a brief story that a colleague of mine shared with me, and I often feel more comfortable sharing information if I'm giving someone a compliment. So, so this is a person who is a colleague who shared with me that after some reflection in terms of how she was interacting with me around some of my DEI initiatives, that she realized that she actually wasn't as supportive as she was trying to present herself as. And so what she actually said to me was that, "I realized I was undermining some of your efforts because I didn't want to lose my power and influence." So I'll read that again. "I realized I was undermining some of your efforts because I didn't want to lose my power and influence." So, and of course I said, "Thank you so much for sharing with me that, you had that realization." And I thought it was really poignant, and I just wondered how true that might be for other colleagues who have never said that. And again, that is what really sustaining DEI work can look like. It might look like losing a little bit, or feeling like you're losing a little bit of your relative influence to allow someone else to have a little bit more influence. So that overall, hopefully, as a whole, as a collective, we can become more inclusive. Okay. Yes. She said, "Do I know what made my colleague realize this?" Well, I know what contributed to it is that essentially, I think she had observed me kind of call in someone else who had some concerns, I think, about the level of support she felt that I was giving to her idea. And I took the opportunity to say, I think there are many times that you haven't supported my ideas either, and was able to give lots of examples. And then I think the other colleague observed this and reflected on it a lot. But I think part of it was watching it and having some distance, but I think also the identifying, what had happened. And being able to see it. So it's so funny, to make choice, it just so happened that some of the more intense obstacles come first, but the next one, the ongoing reflection, I think is a little bit more gentle. And it's exactly what you think. And actually it comes into play with that story that I just shared as well, where they did taking a step back and thinking. And so I don't know how you all like to take a moment to reflect, if it's on the drive, taking a walk, over a cup of coffee, but I do think having some time to just think and process and digest what has happened, what we've learned, how we have been and how we have shown up, is also really helpful and important in terms of sustaining DEI efforts. So here is a quote, and this one is fairly straightforward, from a colleague that said, "I was looking back in my journal from 2 years ago and realized I haven't been as focused on racial justice lately as I was then." So I was looking back in my journal from 2 years ago and realized I haven't been as focused on racial justice lately as I was then. And so this is someone who just happens to have a practice of journaling, and so then they were able to think about their energy and effort and focus, and so that was a tool that they were able to use. But I do think just sometimes thinking about at the end of the day, okay, how was I showing up in those meetings today? Was I really actively doing things to promote inclusivity? Okay. So the I is for interacting bravely. And so this really means, are we able to nurture and cultivate the types of interpersonal relationships where we can have genuine exchanges that may not necessarily be comfortable, but hopefully where we can feel brave. And so this can be people who may have very different experiences from us or come from different backgrounds than we do, but it also can be with people who come from similar backgrounds as we do. But do we have these sorts of relationships specifically related to inclusivity where there is space made so that someone could say to me, Emma, I think that was maybe a little short-sighted when you did that. I think maybe you didn't realize it, but you were not being as inclusive as you could have been. So I wanted to share a quote related to this potential solution to an obstacle, which is, "I am your friend and I have had that experience with you too." I am your friend and I have had that experience with you too. So this comes from a situation, a different situation in which there was a sort of a small group conversation being had about the role of, I would say, perfectionism in academia. So I think a lot of us in academia, we know that there's just a lot of pressure to try to really be excellent and have it together all the time. And obviously we want to be competent. We want to do a good job. And we really do want to be excellent. And it can be a difference between being excellent and being perfect, and also between giving feedback to someone where you consistently point out the flaws, even in something that is mostly positive. If you feel like the vast majority of whatever that professional activity was really great, but really feeling like you really want to just focus on the flaws. And so, in talking about this sort of a situation, a small group of us were also talking about, okay, that is difficult anyway, right? For anyone who is a professional and in DEI work, I think a lot of us know that we can get a lot of feedback. I mean, leaders in general get a lot of feedback, but we get a lot of feedback. And sometimes it can be mostly constructive, mostly critiques, which again, I think the instructive part of that can be very helpful. At the same time, I think that, and this is the conversation that was being had when this comment was made, was what does it look like if there's a person who occupies certain marginalized identities, if mostly the public feedback given to that person is negative, even if that is not necessarily the totality of even how the audience feels, but what does that really look like? So during the course of this conversation was when a person was really feeling, who was being given this feedback, was really feeling like, actually, I don't think I do that. I don't really think so. And then someone that had a very positive relationship was able to step in and say, I'm your friend, and I've had that experience with you too. So I will say that I think it was a really important moment, and I think it's because of the relationships that had already been built. So 2 more. So the next one is confronting oppression. And so really, I wanted to start with, I have this picture of a person going up the steps, because when we're thinking about what does it really look like to take an action, to take a step to confront oppression, it doesn't have to be huge. Sometimes it's a small step. Sometimes it's something that we want to build on. But I also think that being able to collect examples of what that really looks like also can be really important. And so, so the quote for this one is, I just want to call attention to what she said. I just want to call attention to what she said. And so this quote comes from a situation in which there was a nonprofit meeting, and a member of the board of that nonprofit, who happens to be a woman, had been sharing a concern related to something that the nonprofit had been doing. And then a couple months later, she really felt like her thoughts had been dismissed and her concern had been dismissed. A couple of months later, a man also on the board, male board member, made a very similar comment. And the rest of the board seemed to give a lot of attention and energy to it and was very invested in trying to explore this concern. So then the woman said, okay, I just want to say that I said this thing 2 months ago, and I really seems like no one heard what I said. And then there was still silence, and another male on the board said, I just want to call attention to what she said. And until he said that, it appeared from the outside that we were just going to continue on with the conversation. That she took the brave step of saying, I said this 2 months ago, and now that he said it, it seems like we're concerned. So there still wasn't, it didn't seem like going to be a change in that pattern or process until another board member, who's also a male, said, I just wanted to call attention to what she said. And so that is an example of confronting oppression. And so I also think it's a good example of how that can be, it can seem subtle in some ways. I mean, it wasn't subtle in that it actually was shining a light on something, but the words themselves, it's not like there was new information. It was just an invitation to pause. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about emotion management. And I'll ask you all, why do you think emotion management might be a way to overcome any unanticipated obstacles we might run into when trying to carry out DEI initiatives?
It can be distracting. Start to focus more on the emotion than the goal.
Yes, yes.
Managing reactivity.
Managing reactivity. Did I see someone back here? Oh. Okay. Emotions can be distracting, and then also managing reactivity. Yes.
I'd say being objective, because you may have a stake in what you're doing, but you really, it's not about you. You need to think about the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
I like to talk out to the word, the acronym that you're using, which is choice. And if you let go of your emotions, you have choice. If you don't have, you're in your flight or
Yes. Did everyone hear that? So exactly that. And I think, you know, the reason I picked this picture on the right is that it's not that emotions give us no information. So I'm not suggesting that we cut off our emotions. I actually think that emotions can really let us know, okay, something happened and I don't feel right about something that just happened. So I do think it's important to be in tune with our emotions. It's just about managing them. So can we take that information and not necessarily just automatically act on it, but take that information, but also take a pause, think about it, reflect more. And so this is a quote that actually isn't from a specific story, but it's something that I sometimes share and when I'm doing DEI trainings about the inclusivity part, which is, I'm going to take a deep breath so that I can show up in this space the way I want to. I'm going to take a deep breath so that I can show up in this space the way I want to. And the final example I'll give is really one from something actually that occurred with me really in the past week, where I tend to, in general in life, be a fairly quiet person and I'm not, I'm not super extroverted. Typically at a social gathering, I'm probably gonna be talking to one person very lowly. And at the same time, I think it's just my personality, and also I think because I'm a Virgo, a lot of times I actually do think I'm right. So it may take me a long time to say something, but once I do, it's like, okay, listen, that's right. So recently I was having a discussion with someone, and it was about DEI work and kind of what is the best. I was really arguing that, okay, I think we need to use this word, and they were coming back with, no, I think we need to use this other word, and I found myself getting really annoyed and upset. And so then I just said, okay, I need to just exit this conversation for right now and think about this. And my emotion management strategy at that point was I talked to a couple of friends of mine, say like, why am I getting so upset about this? Like, we are talking about words, and I'm like debating like back and forth about a word. And so I think that that was really helpful for me just to get another perspective. And I think that there was some merit to why I was getting so upset, but I also, feeling so bothered was also stopping me from seeing the other person's point of view, which actually wasn't that different from mine. And so I think that was really helpful. So I'm not gonna necessarily go over the tool in great detail. I think that I hopefully have illustrated for you all that the idea is more so that if you're in an organization trying to move forward change and find that the organization seems to not be making much progress or not be making progress as quickly as you thought or others thought, or that there's a lot more resistance than you had anticipated, that it could be that if you take a look at some of these areas, you might find a clue in terms of a way to move forward and a way to get unstuck. So that's it, but I'm happy to take a question or a comment or two. I think we have time, I think. Yes. So if anybody has a comment or a question. I didn't hear everything that you said.
Basically, do you see a relationship between emotion management and stereotype threats?
Is there a relationship between emotion management and stereotype threats? Sure. I mean, I think any sort of, yes. I mean, I think that when we start to act based on our emotions in a way that is not really either in line with our values or in line with our goals, then I think that, yeah, there could be an association. So in that case, I mean, it's more so, I'm worried that, I've heard stereotypes about my sex, about people of my ethnic group, my socioeconomic status, and because of those fears, that is, impacting my performance. So, yes. And I also think that if I am thinking that, so a different sort of situation in terms of this emotion management, where I see it a lot in terms of DEI efforts, has to do with someone who has been called in or called out and feels like their competence was questioned, their identity is questioned, whether they're a good person was questioned, and they're really getting upset. And not really able to hear the information, and a lot of times not as able to actually show up the way they really want to because of those emotional reactions. I can't remember if I saw another hand. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Emma. It is break time, so we have till 10:30. I believe the snacks are out, and we will just see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.